So welcome to What Now, Democrats. How many people were here yesterday? I'm just curious. Raise your hands. A lot of people were here yesterday. Wow, okay. So you may have heard me say this before, but when we started Politicon, year one, we had 138 tickets sold with a couple of weeks to go. We ended up with about 10,000 people this year over the 2 days. And so I think initially the question was, are people in Southern California, do they really care about politics? What do you think? And we've got a couple of people. Have you been here all 3 years, Sally? Cenk, you've definitely been here all 3 years. Okay. Crystal, this is your newbie. So Crystal is our moderator. She's an author, activist, TV host, and president of the People's House Project. Crystal Ball, your moderator.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for skipping brunch to come see us. We appreciate it. So who is excited to fix the Democratic Party in an hour? No big deal. We've got the right panel here to take that on. I do have one ground rule here, if everybody agrees to this on the stage. This is a panel focused on what we can do to move the Democratic Party forward. We talk a lot about Trump in our daily lives. We talk a lot about Trump on the news. Let's not even say the word Trump in this conversation. It'll be a blessed relief for me, at least. So with that, let's go ahead and get to introducing this fabulous panel. First, to my left, she is the first woman elected to represent the state of Minnesota in the United States Senate. Please welcome Senator Amy Klobuchar. Next up, we have author, commentator, and one of the top political consultants ever in the United States of America, Bob Shrum. Up next, we have the founder and CEO of the Young Turks and the host of the flagship show, The Young Turks, Cenk. Got a few fans here, Cenk. Nicely done. Hometown advantage, no fair. Next up, we have Democratic strategist, CNN political commentator, and national press secretary for Senator Bernie Sanders, Simone Sanders. And last but never least, we have political commentator for CNN and the Daily Beast named one of the 100 most influential pundits ever of all time, Sally Kohn. So to set the stage, a couple background facts, which I'm sure everybody on the panel and probably everyone in the room is familiar with. The problems in the Democratic Party go beyond one election. Over the past number of years, we've lost 1,000+ state legislative seats. We've lost governor's mansions. We've lost control of the House. We have the smallest House caucus since Reconstruction. We've lost control of the Senate. And 60% of the country lives under complete GOP rule. So the problems go deeper, I think we would all admit, than one failed election in 2016. So to set the stage here, I'd love to get briefly, starting with you, Senator, and going down the line, from everybody, if you ask the average voter today what their impression, what their view of the Democratic Party is, what would they say, and what would you like them to say?
Well, I think that this has changed in the last few months as the party has evolved some. When you look at from day two, after the inauguration, not saying a name, where millions of people showed up, to March, day 9 at the airports, I think has changed some. I think if you ask them back after the election, they would use some words like stale and things like that. And I think now we are reaching a new point in our party, and it's only moving forward. And it's about resisting, but it's also about insisting on a better way forward. And that is about standing up for people. and leaving no one behind, which sadly in this last election, I think there was too much of that going on. This time, we are geared up to have an economic-focused agenda that stands up for people and makes things better for the average person, because that in the past, that is not what, sadly for us, even though we had the right policies, we stood for. And especially in the Midwest, where I am from, thank you. My husband is the third of 6 boys in his family, and there were so many kids in the station wagon that he would often get lost and left at a gas station and they wouldn't notice it.
I think that's the start of a movie, isn't it?
Exactly. And so this time, we are not going to let the Midwest get left at the gas station.
Go ahead, Bob.
First, I would say that I agree with that, and I think that the fight Democrats have just made against the health proposal of he who shall not be named has helped to define the party, or begun the process of redefining the party to the country. And we now have to go out and, I believe, argue for, fight for, and stand for attacks on income inequality, for increasing the minimum wage, for actually creating genuine opportunities to go to college. My dad was a tool and die maker. I went to Georgetown and Harvard. That's really hard for someone now because the costs are just so absolutely out of control. And if you ask me what I'd like people to say next year and in 2020, I'd like people to say that we stand for both economic justice and social justice. That I reject the fight that's gone on in some parts of the Democratic Party saying, oh, we have to be for one or the other. That's ridiculous. I mean, historically, this party has been the party that has been for both of those. And if we're not for those two things, then what the hell do we exist for?
Well, I love what Bob just said there, because if you're for social justice and economic justice, I guess that would make you a Justice Democrat.
I see what you did there, Cenk. I see what you did there.
So, look, I'm going to be a little bit harsher in my assessment of the Democratic Party, and I don't think that that's going to surprise many of you. So I think that even Crystal's statement of their failures is an understatement. Lost the House, the Senate, the Supreme Court. They lost to a guy that had a 37% approval rating on the day of the election, which is unimaginable. They've lost 69 out of the 99 state legislatures. So with that stunning record of failure, they have to at least raise their hand and say, we are doing it wrong. And the American people, for whatever reason, don't like us. Let's figure out what that reason is. And I'll tell you what it is. So to your question, Crystal, they will say, if you ask them about the Democratic Party, they will say the establishment. And that is a miserable thing to say. So that is a label that is disastrous and will lead to far more electoral defeats. So what direction should they go? They should stop the corruption. So that is not personal, it is systemic corruption. When you take money from millionaires and billionaires and you do it systematically, and corporations, you will represent them. We know that. And so people get upset at me when I say it, but I'm the messenger. It doesn't matter what I say. What matters is what the American people actually believe, and they're showing it at the polls. So you can get mad at me and go, no, we're not systemically corrupt. I took billions of dollars, but that didn't affect my vote at all. But then people won't show up to vote for you because they find that proposition comical, absolutely comical. So what direction should we go? Complete and utter anti-corruption. We will not represent corporations. We will not represent the rich. We will represent the voters. So last thing, if you're going to represent the voters, what do? It's actually exceedingly simple and to the great Democratic advantage. Look at the polling. We win and crush on every issue. Social Security, 84%, Medicare, 77%. Whether it's against wars, against tax cuts for the rich, there's not an issue we lose on. Actually run on those issues. Medicare is at 77. Medicare for all is at 60%. The country is saying that is a government program that works. Let us in. Let us into Medicare. Why won't you just let us into Medicare? It's not hard. I mean, are you telling me that a position that 60% of the country agrees with, now 61% say the government, the federal government, should run healthcare? What is difficult about this? And you know what it is. It's the drug companies and the health insurance companies that are donating to the politicians. Get out of the way, get out of the way, get out of the way, and we're going to win, and then we'll win.
Ms. Simone Sanders.
So I have been fortunate to sit in a number of different focus groups with quote unquote real people as of late, and actually go out there and talk to these real people that people assume we don't speak to because we live in DC and New York, or even California, as though real people don't also live in California. And folks are saying, so I think some of what people say about the party right now is they like that the party has stood up against healthcare, but they're not sure what the party is for. And so if you ask them, you know, who is the Democratic Party for? I've been places where they have said, well, they're not for working people. And that was shocking to, you know, folks like myself and some other people who know what the Democratic Party says it stands for. But people will say that the Democratic Party doesn't actually stand for working people. They don't know what it stands for. So I would hope that, I know, right? It's shocking, right? It's sad. So I would hope, actually, Bob stole what I was going to say. I would hope that a year from now, 2 years from now, or heck, a month from now, people will say that the Democratic Party stands for working people. They stand for economic justice and social justice. They stand for people who believe that healthcare is a right, not a privilege. They stand for these basic human rights that's all we're talking about that people should have. And I think we can get there. I think the party has definitely made some fumbles, but I don't think it's anything that can't be fixed. And folks just have to be willing to come to the table and do things differently. And sometimes that's hard to do.
Sally Cohn, fix the party.
Well, I'll try to say something different. There's a lot of what I heard that I agree with. You know, first of all, look, just to pick up on where Cenk left off, I completely 1,100% agree campaign finance reform is a fundamental fix. We need to get control back of our democracy and take it away from big moneyed interests, period. It remains interesting, though, that both parties take money from moneyed interests and big business, and still I side with one party over the other. So in other words, it's not clear, like, the extent to which that's, I don't know that voters are going out and saying, well, you know, the Democrats take money from corporate interests, and therefore I'm going to vote for Republicans who take money from corporate interests. I do think it stops Democrats from upholding and living up to our true values. Now, that being said, there's a lot of other things that stop the Democrats from upholding what I always believe were our true values, and that's my sense of, look, parties change, and the meaning of parties has changed over history, and if we go into the other room where all the conservatives are, they'll tell you that once upon the time the Democrats were the party that opposed civil rights, opposed racial justice, and that is true. And, you know, in 1964, the American public actually thought that the Republicans and Democrats felt the same about racial justice, that the parties stood on the same plank, same position. A year later, they said the Democrats are the party of racial justice. And as I was growing up as a Democrat in this country, I thought that the Democrats were the party of the underdog. That's what drew me to be a Democrat. The Democratic legacy of the 1960s, the 1970s, the 1980s, we were the party that stood for social justice and economic justice, and we stood for the underdog. And what we've seen happen over time, and it didn't just start in this election. It was partly what happened under Obama, partly what happened under Rahm Emanuel's shepherding of Congress, partly what happened under Bill Clinton, was we saw the party of the people become the party of the elite. And we just had an election where, I'm not going to name him, but where a populist billionaire, or millionaire, we don't know, a populist with a few $1,000s in the bank and a really big plane, a populist Republican beat an establishment elite Democrat. That is fundamentally, and this isn't to pin anything on Hillary, but that is fundamentally, that reflects it's not just about her as a candidate, it's not just about this election, it reflects a misshaping of our party and what we stand for over time. I want us to, look, we are I think, reorganizing as a country away from conventional left-right. We've seen this in this election, certainly, and the whole world is moving toward a more populism versus elite dynamic. And the question at this juncture is, are we going to be a inclusive populism, or are we going to be an exclusionary populism, a populism of hate? And I want to see the Democrats be the party of participatory, inclusive, people-driven populism. That's the party that will win elections going forward. That's also, by the way, the party that'll do the right friggin' thing. And not just care about winning elections.
Yeah, I think that's a very profound point, because what I would say.
Thank you, Crystal.
Anytime, Sally. That's what I'm here for. What I would say is that part of the way that the party got off track was with an obsession with winning, which has only led to losing. It's not about saying we're different, it's about actually being different. And to your point, Sally, I think if you ask the average voter, and I live in Kentucky now, so I get to talk to regular folks a lot too, Simone. If you ask them, they will tell you that it is the party of elites and that we're condescending and out of touch. And there's truth to that caricature. It's not all true, but there's truth to that caricature. Senator Klobuchar, what I want to ask you with that in mind is, to the party's credit, there's an awareness that we can't just be against. We have to have a positive agenda, something you've been working very hard on, which I'm extremely grateful for. But as we roll out that new agenda, the better deal, are Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer the right messengers
What a question.
for that pivot?
Okay, I think we need messengers from all over the country. And those messengers include our leadership, of course, but they also include mayors and people whom you might not have seen on TV before. And I think if Bernie Sanders' campaign brought a lot of things to our party, but that was one of them. The need to have other voices, and especially voices. Nancy's from this state. Chuck is from another state on the East Coast. So I think you need voices in the middle. But I think just as important as that is what we're saying. And that this agenda has to be real, and it has to reflect this new economy, the gig economy, where people aren't just staying at one job and they're going to have to bring their health care and bring their benefits with them and find ways to save. I think it's about, as our friends up here so beautifully said, it's about taking on a lot of these big interests. For the first time, when we stood there, a group of us, and announced this agenda, including Elizabeth Warren, we talked about antitrust. Now that might sound like super boring, or maybe you're thinking Teddy Roosevelt, but this is taking on a situation where more and more companies have merged, so we actually have 50% more mergers than we have had in decades, right? And that is consolidated power. And when you look at some of the things that have been happening to people, a lot of that is because they are losing their voice in this democracy. They're losing their voice because of Citizens United. And we should pass a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. This is about changing our laws governing competition. It's everything from airlines to hospitals to beer. It's even hit beer. When beer companies control, that's really serious stuff. When they control all the distribution line under them, that's a problem. And then something that I've been working on for years, which is the pharmaceutical issue. So Bernie and I did an amendment this beginning of the year, and we're now getting more and more people on our side to support this, to simply say, you know, in my state and in Vermont, we can see Canada from our porch, right? So how come that the drugs in Canada are half the price of what they are in America? That is wrong. We have the most expensive drugs in the country. So by unleashing the power of 41 million seniors, you didn't think I was going to go there, but I am. And by the way, one of our best allies in this fight against that mean-spirited, to use the guy's words, mean healthcare bill, was AARP, and to unleash, you got a chair, come on. To unleash the power of 41 million seniors so that they can negotiate prices. That's going to make a difference for everyone. To allow for more competition in the drug market, drugs from Canada. To allow for more generics to get on the market. These are all things that we have to do. And so when we talk about a new agenda, it is not just taking the old ideas, it is actually coming up with some new ideas that stands up for economic justice and stands up for people.
Yeah. By the way, I love that AARP got such a round of applause when it was mentioned. That's amazing. Cenk, go ahead.
Can I jump in on that? So I think Chuck Schumer and the Senate Democrats have gone some of the way towards getting better, and so the new proposal has parts of it that I really like. The antitrust stuff is great. It's an absolute crime that we can't negotiate drug prices at Medicare, and that should be fixed immediately, and it shows the hypocrisy of Donald Trump. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Get out.
Off the stage.
Voldemort.
You gotta,
Maybe another
Take a
chance.
shot now. I'm just.
But let's keep it real. Obama didn't change that rule for 8 years. He didn't. That's how we lost people, okay? So, all right, so your Schumer on the right road, okay? I wish he'd get there a lot quicker. Pelosi says she's not for Medicare for all. Terrible. Oh, it's a bridge too far. For who? Obviously not according to the polling, the American people, let alone your own party, which is overwhelmingly over 80% in favor of it. It's a bridge too far for her donors. They say maybe your time has come and gone. She says, no, I still raise the most money. That's exactly what the problem is. Okay, so but mainly it's never personal. But when I want to break down some of the myths that you see on TV, which is an establishment factory. When now all of a sudden Bernie Sanders is the #1 most popular politician in the country. And I was told over and over again that in the primaries, if someone is the leader of the Democratic Party, everyone else should step aside. Remember when we heard that? And now all of a sudden the establishment media, in cahoots with the establishment Democrats, tell us we need fresh faces. I don't remember them saying that about Hillary Clinton. I don't remember it. It was only a year ago. And I bring that up now because how come we need fresh faces when Bernie's leading, but we don't need fresh faces when it's Schumer and Pelosi?
I want to get Simone in here, Bob, and then let me get to you. But Simone, I would like to hear from you first because I think there's some interesting points here. Number one, I do think that the focus in particular on monopoly and on breaking up trust, that's going to be an increasingly important issue that has impacts on all of our lives.
and watch for my bill next week.
We'll be looking for that bill. But the party is facing a complete loss of trust and credibility. I mean, that's where we are. We have around the same approval rating as the one who shall not be named. So is anyone even listening to the message, no matter how great it is, if we don't have the right messengers?
So I do believe we need good, credible, and in some instances, better messengers across the board. I will say that there is polling that supports that. I don't care how partisan people think we really are and how divided we are, folks are still watching television. That's why it's important for members of Congress and mayors and governors who get on television and talk about what the party is doing. We should also do the Young Turks. We should also be getting on these really fabulous podcasts, but we have to get on TV because people are still turned on their televisions. They're still watching TV, and so when all you're seeing on television is Russia, 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 and Republican members and commentators like us who are on segments talking about Russia, not because Russia's not I'm not saying Russia's not important, but when that's all the folks who are watching television, consuming it across the country get, a better deal doesn't break through. You don't get to hear specifically about what the party is doing and what's going on. So that's when we have to get creative, get out in our community, so on and so forth. Look, I think Bernie is great, right? He's absolutely amazing. Y'all can clap for Bernie. But the base of the be clear, I want to be very clear when I say this. The base of the Democratic Party is a hodgepodge of some really amazing people that we have not been talking about. We talk a lot about working people, and there's been this big focus on getting back, quote unquote, those working class, I would read that as white working class voters that we lost in the election, quote unquote. Let me share something with you. America is browning. By 2032, the working class in America will be majority minority.
That's right.
By 2040, America will be majority minority. And so when we talk about winning back those voters that went to Donald Trump, be clear, only 8% of voters are voters that we refer to as Obama-Trump voters. That's 8% of the electorate. That's still a really big number given everybody that voted, but that's not everybody. So we need to talk about working class people, black working class people, Latino working class people, Korean working class people, Asian American working class people, working class people that are women. Women go to work, we like jobs. Working class people that are gay, that are LGBTQ. But we also need to talk about millennials. And so we need to talk about millennials, which is the most diverse generation ever, by the way. We need to talk about black women. Because black women have literally pushed, pulled, galvanized, and kept the Democratic Party afloat, and they have yet to get so much as a thank you card following this election. And so while I'm with that we need to take, there are a myriad of things that people are talking about that is wrong with the party, that some new things need to come in. And I think some things that all my friends up here on the stage have said are correct, and a lot of the things that Bernie have said are right, but we cannot go away from the base. And what I see happening...
Do you see a tension, though, between speaking to working class voters of all races and genders and political persuasions and staying with the base? Is there a tension between those two things?
Again, working class people are black, too. Working class people are Latino. It is the rhetoric. I don't know if y'all have ever been... There's a place called McDowell County, West Virginia. It is one of the most resilient communities I have ever been to. It is also one of the whitest. To be frank, I'm also from Omaha, Nebraska. I'm from one of those really red places, those flyover states that people talk about. There are black people in Nebraska as well. The people in McDowell County, West Virginia, have some of the same issues and are facing some of the same trials as folks in downtown Chicago, Illinois. Like the economic issues cut across the board. Across the board, people want jobs. Across the board, people want better health care. Across the board, premiums are too damn high. Across the board, people want more competition in the markets. So we have to break down the rhetoric, but when we continue to play into this false dichotomy, into this false choice between whether we talk to the working class people, again, when people say that, they're really talking about white working class people, or do we talk to the base, the social justice issues of the base, that's false. If we just talk frankly and authentically about the issues, we will break through. And I think that's what the party needs to do. So when the party goes on a tour across the country and brings no young people, brings no black women, that's a problem for me.
Sally, let me ask you, Sally, because I think, one thing here, and my big push is it's not just about the messaging. The party actually has to be a different party. But one thing that I see as sort of a consistent issue is when people say working class, frequently they are referring to the white working class, and even when they're not, there's an assumption that they are. Is there another, as a, somebody who does a lot of television and talks about these things?
Somebody who's white, it's okay.
As someone who's white.
As somebody who's white, how can you say it differently, Sally? Speak to us.
And talks on television.
Oh my gosh, really?
Is there another phrase? Is there a different language we can use to get at this? Because it's something I'm very sensitive to.
So I want to go deeper than language. I'm going to double down on what Simone just said. Always brilliant. And I'm going to go like 10 steps further to maybe piss some people off. Sorry. First of all, I actually make an assumption, and maybe I'm just an overly generous human being. I've been accused of that, but I make an assumption that most leaders in the Democratic Party, I won't name names, but some of the names who come across this conversation, if you ask them in private with a promise it would never be public, would say, hell yeah, I support Medicare for all. Hell yeah, I support, the most radical things we could think of. I actually think, and this was always my sense around same-sex marriage, that in fact our party's leaders privately were there, but they didn't think publicly they could support it. And so that's why they hemmed and hawed. And that kind of discomfort is what people sense that. They sense if you're not being, we call it authenticity. But you know it, you feel it. And my sense of why that is, right, is because of this sense that to be a legitimate party, to be a winning party, we have to appeal to the middle. And I think that is defined in two ways. One, it's defined in a sort of pre-hyper-partisanship notion about swing voters who are disappearing by the day, and there's a kind of rational element to it. But also, let's be very frank, I think our politics exist within a framework of white normative hegemony, of what we might call white supremacy, that the most legitimate voters are white voters.
Come on, Sally, you better preach.
And so,
Yeah, give us this word on this Sunday afternoon.
all right, it's Sunday. And so I tell you now. I'm sorry, no. All right. But seriously, that there is and we've heard it in the, that, the people who voted for Barack Obama were not legitimate voters, right? We've heard that critique, that attack, and there is some sense, I think, unconsciously, not often consciously, that if you did not win an election with a majority of white working class, white middle class, just white voters, you didn't really win. That your election is somehow less than, what do we want to call it? Legitimate, triumphant, right? And so I want to say, look, if people haven't read the work of Steve Phillips, who I think is one of the best electoral political scholars in the country, there is enough progressive whites and voters of color for the Democrats to be the dominant political party going forward right now and into the future. And what is wrong with, what is it in our psyche that we don't say, right? African American women, by far the most loyal political voting bloc in this country.
We voted in 94% for Hillary Clinton.
But for instance, if we had African American turnout, just African American turnout in the last election, forget Obama, it was higher under Obama, it was 66%, I think, but under Kerry it was 60%, and it was down under Hillary. We didn't prioritize that. We didn't care about that as much. And now all we talk about is wanting to go after the Trump voters. And yes, of course, I do think if we stood for anything, if we actually stood for things and had those values and had populist values, I think those voters would come to us. But there's something in our psyche that says a legitimate party goes after those voters and doesn't proudly stand with the diversifying of this country and what this country actually looks like.
And as Simone brilliantly pointed out, African American voters also want to be able to have a job and provide for their families. Bob, go ahead and get in here.
Look, several points. One, you're absolutely right about gay marriage. I was there, I dealt with it, and people privately would say, this is ridiculous. Of course I'd like to be for it. But it was being used as a wedge issue, and it was used brilliantly by the Bush campaign in 2004 as a wedge issue, and it's probably why they carried Ohio. So politicians are kind of dealing with some of these realities when they do this. Number two, and maybe this will make me unpopular, I want to say something in defense of both Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. When Voldemort first proposed his health care plan, you could have made a lot of money betting at Ladbrokes that there were going to be one or two Democratic defectors. And Chuck Schumer held that caucus together. Amy knows more about it. And second, I do think there's sexism in American politics, and I think a huge amount of it has been directed at Nancy Pelosi. If we win the House next year, and God, I hope we do, a huge part of the credit will go to her, and a lot of people who are members of the House and candidates would tell you that. She did, after all, lead the party in 2006 when we did take back the House. Number three, I totally agree with the idea that it is completely condescending to assume that the phrase working class means white people. Black working class people and white working class people have the same needs and the same anxieties. That's why in your state in Kentucky, there were all these people who had voted for Voldemort who suddenly said, wait a minute, he's going to try and take away my health insurance, and who got very, very upset by it. However, we do have to get back those white working class people, as well as black working class people, at least in the near term. If you're talking about 15 years from now, you won't need them. Now, as a moral matter, I think we should speak for them because they do have these needs, and they have been treated unfairly. There's a county in Wisconsin called Pepin County. Now, don't ask me why there's a county in Wisconsin, maybe Amy knows, because I think it borders Minnesota, named after Charlemagne's father. But that county voted Democratic in every single election since 1972 and almost voted for George McGovern. It was carried by by the Don, by 24 points. Now, I think, and that leads me to my last point, I think that there is an alchemy, a chemistry in American politics where messengers connect or they don't connect. People wrote Bernie Sanders off, 1%, gonna go nowhere, and boy did he connect with people from the very first time he stood on the shores of Lake Champlain and announced his candidacy. He connected. And it's not, in my view, about where you're from or how much money you have. I mean, Franklin Roosevelt connected, John F. Kennedy connected. They both came from the establishment, but people outside the establishment thought and believed that they cared about them. I think our failure in 2016 was to convey the idea that we cared about these people, and I think in 2020 we have to make sure, and in 2018 for that matter, that people understand that we're caring about them and that we're fighting for them. If we do that, we'll win.
So I want to ask a very important policy question of the senator, and then we've got a couple of questions out here that I want to get to. Senator, today the top 3 most common jobs in the nation are retail sales clerk, cashier, and fast food worker, all of which are low-paying, precarious jobs, and all of which are in danger of being automated, if not out of existence, significantly reduced. We already have a low-wage job crisis in this country. We are facing a jobless crisis in this country. What sorts of ideas are you and your colleagues thinking about to address what is a massive economic transformation on the level of the Industrial Revolution?
Thanks. Number one, increasing the minimum wage and increasing in a big way. It has not been increased on the federal level since I came into the Senate, since the very beginning. It's an outrage. Number two, we have to make sure that as we see this change coming to the economy with driverless cars and everything, that we are training the workers not only for the jobs that we're going to see in the future, but the jobs we have now. Part of this is acknowledging that not everyone wants to get a 4-year degree right away. My sister didn't graduate from high school. She got a GED. She went and worked at a factory for a while. She then went and got a 2-year degree at a community college and then went on there and got an accounting degree. That was her story, and it took a decade. And seeing these different paths is really important. And if we're going to bring up the graduation rate, my state, we have a huge achievement gap between African American students and white students in our schools. It's an outrage. We have to start looking at every available job, many of which pay well, and make sure we're helping these kids to get into these jobs. We have not been doing well at that. Immigration reform. You might think, well, that doesn't sound like an answer when, you've got these kids that don't have jobs now. But when you look at the economy as a whole, our economy has been stronger because of immigrants, right? I stand on the shoulders of immigrants. My grandparents were Slovenian. And by the way, one of my lowest moments of the year was I was displaced as the most famous Slovenian American by Melania Trump. It's true. She was actually born an hour away from my relatives. Every time I look at her, it's like looking in the mirror. So this idea of immigration reform, when you look at it, 25% of our U.S. Nobel laureates were born in other countries, right? This is ideas that came from people who were born in other lands. 70 of our Fortune 500 companies are headed up by immigrants. So this idea that that's somehow going to hurt our country, it has helped our country economically. So that is a piece of it as well, as you look at new ideas and if we're going to get forward as a country. So I think so much of this has been that we've been set in our old ways of looking at things as the world is changing around us. And we are going to have to make the case, and I just want to echo what Bob said here. It's very easy to be against people when they're in charge, but in this last week, you saw something that I don't think anyone thought could have happened. We thought we were basically dead on arrival with that health care bill. And we held our party together in the United States Senate from Joe Manchin, who stood up for the people of West Virginia and said that they deserve Medicaid, right, to Bernie Sanders. And we did that, and we never wavered. And when you have that kind of unity on a common principle, it gets contagious. And while a lot of the focus has been on John McCain and when he walked into that chamber and made that vote, and let's not forget the 2 other women, do you think they would ever have been there if it wasn't for us leading the way and it wasn't for all of you getting out and going to those marches from day 2? No way. So I refuse to write an obituary today, okay? We have been through a resounding defeat in the last election. There is no doubt about that. But we have a way forward, and we are walking it right now.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you so much, Senator. And one note from Kentucky before we start taking questions, on the question of can Democrats ever win again in Kentucky or West Virginia or Tennessee or these places. We still have a Democratic Attorney General. Our Democratic Secretary of State, Allison Lundergan Grimes, is here this weekend. We still have Democrats who represent coal country in East Kentucky. So Democrats can win in these places. We cannot give up on them. Let's go ahead and get the first question here.
Thank you. So I feel one of the problems is we're still defining America according to the 50s and 60s definition of Norman Rockwell, June and Ward Cleaver, when most women are running their own households now, we're still defining a family as this, really kind of nuclear aspect of, again, the Stepford wife, and the man is coming home and being, so this is one of the issues that's going on. So how are you all really connecting when you're thinking in terms of the fact of, like the young lady said here, that, most women are out here running their own households, whether, they're young women or they're middle-aged or even older women. Where are the WIA dollars, the Workforce Investment Action federal job training programs that are actually helping to make people sustainable within their communities? Those dollars and those monies used to go into black communities when there were black communities. And so where are those dollars nowadays when, given the fact even here in LA County, the #1 demographic of women are ending up homeless year after year, decade after decade, are black women, middle-aged, single, and elderly black women. Thank you.
Thank you. Simone, do you want to tackle that one?
Well, where are the federal workforce dollars? I think we need to ask our members of Congress. I think that there are things that are being done. So I want to be clear. I've been a Democrat since I've been able to, register to vote. I have worked for Democrats. I've worked 15 different campaigns, including one presidential. I believe in building up and working for Democrats and working on behalf of the party. I just think we need to be a little bit more vocal and clear about the things that it is that we want from our elected officials. And y'all might be like, it's on the onus of the elected officials, but I also think it's on the onus of these communities. Because when we showed up for health care and said, we do not want you to take our health care, we do not want X, Y, and Z. The reason Medicare for All is so popular now is because people, like folks in this room, are so vocal about saying that's what they want. And so part of it is, I think we need to show up and say those are things that we want. And on the onus of our elected officials, I think it's their job to also educate themselves about things outside of the mainstream, things that they can be doing for various communities to really close the gaps.
Okay, can I jump in here? Look, I got to be honest, I only half buy that. Because when we do let Nancy Pelosi and Dianne Feinstein and all these people know we're for Medicare for all, they go, just hush up already, right? They don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear it. So it's not like it's unclear. It's not like the polling is unclear. It's not like the town halls are unclear. They don't want to hear it. So I think the onus is way more on them than it is on us. And
I think the onus is way more on Voldemort and on the Republicans in the Senate.
No,
and the Republicans in the
but
House.
Bob,
And let
hold
me
on.
tell you something. They're too busy saving Obamacare right now to fight for single payer. The day will come when people will fight for single payer. I think it is very unfair to Nancy Pelosi to say she's not for it.
Hold on. We have a senator here, so I'd love to hear from her.
I got to address that. Okay, when you say you want to take credit for defeating a bill that was at 17% approval rating, I love you, brother, and thank you for keeping the caucus together, but that is a really, really low bar, okay? And Nancy Pelosi is on the record as saying she will not push for single payer.
You know what?
And I will tell you something, the number one problem is you don't make your case.
Gentlemen.
You never make your case. That's why you lose elections, because you don't fight for your principles. Fight.
Gentlemen,
Why do you think legal marriage, gay marriage, why did they all privately were in favor of it but didn't want to do it? Because they didn't want to make their case. They were cowards. Make your case. Be proud to be a progressive.
But wait. Let's stop pretending. Stop. Let's stop pretending as though that our establishment entities across America have always just done what's right on their own. Like, we would still be sitting at segregated lunch counters if it weren't for people who pushed our establishment entities to move. And so while I hear your frustration, and look, I think that there is a place for Medicare for all. Absolutely, there is a place for single payer. I don't understand why we just
right now.
Okay,
Hold
but
on.
I think people should continue to push for it. But it is not crazy to say that people are just continuing to stand up and folks aren't listening. You have to continue to demand. At some point, they're going to have to listen to you.
That's
Okay,
exactly what I'm doing. I'm
Cenk,
pushing right now.
Cenk,
You want me to push? I'm pushing.
Let me get Senator Klobuchar in here. I want to get Senator Klobuchar in here because we have one of these theoretical folks that you're talking about. She happens to be right here on stage. And she may not be able to yell quite as loud as the gentleman on the panel, but I think she can get in here.
This is like a yell fest.
So, Senator,
not gonna be good for anyone.
What is the
Okay.
mood among your colleagues in terms of single payer, and what are the thoughts there?
So their first obligation is to the people that they represent, which is the people of this country. And what we have seen in the last few months, and you can contrast it with Obamacare and the Trump plan in a minute, or the Voldemort plan, or whatever you're going to call it. But I have never seen anything like it. People coming up in parades with a child with Down syndrome, saying, I've always been a Republican, but this is my child. This is the face for health care in this country. Last weekend, I met a pitcher and a catcher, 11 years old. Pitcher diagnosed with juvenile diabetes, catcher perfectly healthy. And the mom said, is this a lottery now? Are they telling me one of my children will live and one won't live? So while we can have the policy debate, and I would love to expand Medicare and look at maybe expanding Medicaid and doing that next, right now, we have an obligation for those of us that are actually on the front line doing the job to protect that pitcher, right? To protect those kids. And that means making sure that people stay on their insurance till they're 26 years old, the kids, right? It means making sure we don't discriminate against people for pre-existing conditions. And it is not a perfect bill. I said that the day it passed. But we want to make it better. And what I'm hoping now is no matter what you see in the tweets, no matter what he says, that now that vote that night meant one thing, that we have to go back and work together to bring down those pharmaceutical prices. And if they don't do it, we will push them to take votes on it every single day. That we must make improvements to this, and then we will go on to fight the next fight. But
And
to
is
just
the
say
next
that we
fight-
should just throw it all and not make it clear that we have a difference with the Republican Party on that, look where the votes lined up on that bill.
Is the next fight in your view Medicare for all or some version of single payer?
Well, I think that when you see the costs that are going up, we will see more and more for, first of all, the public option within the existing thing. That would be a smart way to go in these states and to make that the fight, Medicare for all. But I think the fight right now that's before us that we wouldn't have been able to win without you guys at our back was the fight to save these families from complete economic ruin.
I want to get to the next questioner here, Sal. Go ahead,
Thank
sir.
you. Yes. I'm going to address this to Senator Klobuchar and Mr. Shrum because I think I know where Cenk stands on this. In 1964, the Republicans had a debacle, and Goldwater lost a landslide election. And the message that the Republicans took from that is that was never going to happen to them again. They built a machine, they built a media machine, they built it based on a philosophy, not a bunch of little things that they were going to do. It was a simple philosophy. Government doesn't work. And every time they've gotten into power, they've proved that point. But the fact is that we have not yet done that. We keep talking about the edges. The Republicans made up their mind not to deal with the middle, but to move the middle. And they've moved the middle way away from it was in the 60s. Now, if we're a moderate, I ran for Congress. If we're a moderate, then we're not going to succeed. So my question is this. If the Republicans were able to believe in a conservative revolution, what keeps the Democratic Party from believing in a progressive revolution that will win hearts and minds rather than elections? Look forward.
I believe strongly in a progressive revolution, and I would say, by the way, that since 1964, we have seen enormous progress in this country on a number of issues. Not all issues, we have a long way to go, but we've seen a lot of progress. The history you outline is actually a little more complicated. The Republican reaction to the Goldwater defeat was, we have to go to some kind of mushy middle. And that's what Richard Nixon, much as we may not like him, that's certainly what he was in domestic policy. He signed into law the Environmental Protection Agency. He did a deal with Ted Kennedy and George McGovern to expand food stamps massively. And it was only with the coming of Ronald Reagan that the Republican Party became, and by the way, today Reagan would be a rhino. He'd be a Republican in name only. They'd throw him out.
But didn't they start grooming him in 64?
This was a guy who was for immigration reform. Yeah. This was a guy who did a deal with Tip O'Neill to save Social Security. At a deeper level, I think you're touching on something very profound. What the Republican Party did not do after the little Nixonian detour, what they did not do was abandon the word conservative.
Right.
In 1960, Richard Nixon used to say, you know, he was a moderate or liberal Republican. Liberal was a good word. It wasn't a bad word. And then Democrats got terrified of the word liberal and to some extent terrified of the word progressive and didn't go out and make that fight. The one thing I believe right now is that this is a party that will do this. And I think we can't look backwards through the lens of 2016 and form a circular firing squad and somehow or other see that as the way that we're going to win. I think we're going to win by standing up for our values. I think that what Senator Klobuchar is talking about, what Democrats are talking about, is a way forward. It is what I said at the beginning, economic justice and social justice, and make the Republicans vote on it again and again and again. And if we get to single payer, I'd be thrilled, but I think the best way to get there is through the public option to start.
All right, I'd like to take the next woman who's in line for a question. The next woman who's in line for a question, please.
I'm 16 and I'm afraid, I'm really scared that I won't be able to go to college because I'm not going to be able to afford it. What can the Democrats do to help people like me who are afraid that they can't go to college?
So the question Thank you so much for that question. And Senator, I think you're probably best positioned to answer this. The question was, I'm 16 and I'm worried I won't be able to afford to go to college. What are Democrats doing to make her college dreams a reality?
We can't just stay where we are right now, and that is why we have proposed, with Elizabeth Warren's leadership, a bill, right, that would make college affordable for everyone, and that is what we need to be doing. We have a situation where we made some changes, which were good when President Obama was in, to make student loans affordable for students like yourself who are coming in, but there are so many students. It's right now the #1 form of debt for a lot of our seniors is actually student loans, because they are either paying for the loans of their kids or their grandkids, and so it is reverberating through. Yeah, I see some hands, not of grandparents maybe, but it's reverberating through our whole economy. So I think that is making it more affordable, making the 2-year degree an option and not dissing that degree and giving it the dignity that it deserves, that I know in my own family, for the 1 and the 2-year degrees. Looking at the skills that as a 16-year-old, what kind of advice you're getting in high school. We found out that a lot of kids aren't getting the advice about what these loans mean and what your choices are. So they go to one school and they get these huge group of loans, and then there's no job in the field that they picked. You're doing pretty well for yourself now. But it's doing a much better. Remember all the career advice we used to get? That's been cut a lot in our education system. So it's doing a much better job in high school, getting in early to talk to kids about the careers. And I love the idea. I have a bill with Susan Collins. I love that I can name drop her name as a Republican today. But on apprenticeships, to make it easier for kids when they're in high school to start working at some of these places. And it's not just on the factory floor, it's all over the place. That's what we need to do, and take really a radical change. And one thing that hasn't been mentioned is the Democratic governors across the country. When we look at leadership and how we can make our case, look at the difference between how Minnesota is doing economically under a Democratic governor and Wisconsin under Scott Walker, okay? There is a clear choice there. Or look at what's happening, what Jerry Brown has done here in California, right? So that's what I think. When this education issue, the answer just doesn't start or end at the federal level. It has a lot to do who we put in the governor's office.
So, but on this issue, look, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Let's put meat on the bones of that question of how do you make your case. Here's what you do about your education. Free college education. Okay. So now, not only will Republicans, but Democrats will tell me that's unrealistic. Oh, Cenk, take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism, right? But the reality is, it's $75 billion a year. That is, you can get 20 years of free college education for every child in America that wants it from one cost of the Iraq War. So what they did, and here's how you win on that issue, is that you say, because of your damned war, we lost 20 years of the American dream. You robbed the American kids and their families of the American dream, and we're gonna give it back to them, okay? That's how you make your case. That's how you get free college education. You don't do it by half measures.
So, go ahead, Sally.
I feel like a friggin' moderate next to Cenk, but you know, here's the challenge in all this. It's not all bad or all good, right? There are things about the current establishment Democratic Party that I like, which is obviously why I'm a Democrat, and there are things that make me proud to be a Democrat in the policies and proposals they put forward. And I actually think that a lot of the tensions, I'm gonna tag team with Simone again, going back to her previous point, a lot of the tensions we're raising are bigger than the Democratic Party alone. Let's look at free college. I happen to prefer, earned college through community service, but the reason free college is on the map right now, let's be clear, is largely because of left civil society organizations that put it on the map, that 20 years ago weren't talking about that. Right? So it was because of organizations like Demos, the amazing work of Heather McGhee, that said, let's start talking about that now, and Bernie picked it up. And the problem,
And
the
to be
larger
clear,
problem
he was talking
is,
about making public college and universities tuition free, which is
Correct.
different from
Right.
free college. I just want to put that out there.
Yes, but let's be clear that that a larger conversation here is about the fact that it hasn't just been the Democratic Party that has hewed toward the center, but it has been the left that has hewed toward the center. And it was a problem of the left that we couldn't get the public option. We didn't have the mobilizing and organizing muscle to push for the public option in
And I would
Obamacare
say
in the
if
first
that
place.
vote were to happen today,
And
we would get the public option.
I think that's part of what's changed in this election. The other thing we have to be careful about, though, is I want to go back to the other question about, 4 out of 5 American families no longer fit that conventional picket fence image in America. And what we have is this tension where the Republican Party is trying to deconstruct everything we have. The Democrats are trying to add bits and pieces. All right, we've got marriage, we've got Social Security, let's add gay people to it. All right, cool. And that's not the only part of the game. There's a third part of the game, which is radical transformation, which is rethinking how does our economy work, how does work work, how does college work, how does family work 20, 30, 40, 100 years into the future. And the left needs to lead that conversation. The Democratic Party is never going to lead that conversation. And to my mind, the left has largely failed to be engaged in a radical transformative conversation that then pushes the rest of the country.
So Sally, I'm going to wrap up the panel here, guys, but I want a one-word yes or no answer from everybody on the panel, which I know everybody loves. 2018, did Democrats take back the House, yes or no, Sally Cohn?
No. Sorry, the numbers don't look good at the moment, but I don't know.
Simone, what do you think?
Yes. Yes, we can.
Yes, we can. Si se puede. Cenk. With the Justice Democrats, Cenk. Anything is possible, Cenk.
All right. Unfortunately, not with this leadership, but 2020 is all ours.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's right.
Bob Schramm.
Yes, I think we will take it back with this leadership.
Yes.
I want to let's give our panelists a big round of applause for a very spirited conversation. Thank you all so much, and thank you all for the questions.